The neutron star cast an eerie blue glow across the vast circular chamber of the Galactic Council headquarters. Through the transparent aluminum windows, the hypnotic spiral of superheated matter feeding into the star created a backdrop that reminded John Miller of just how far humanity had come and how small Earth still was in the grand scheme of things. Impressive, isn't it? Lisa Carter, president of the United Earth Coalition, stood beside him at the viewport. Her typically confident posture seemed slightly diminished by the grandeur surrounding them. 3 months ago, we didn't even know intelligent alien life existed. Now we're walking into their version of the United Nations. Miller nodded, adjusting the formal diplomatic uniform that still felt stiff and unnatural. As Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council, he carried the weight of 7 billion humans on his shoulders. The gravity shifts in the next corridor, he reminded her, checking his datapad. The council chambers accommodate 17 different gravitational preferences simultaneously. President Carter smiled tightly. They've thought of everything, haven't they? As they walked through the corridor, Miller felt the subtle tug as his body adjusted to the new gravitational field. The rest of Earth's delegation followed. Scientists, military advisors, and diplomatic staff, all wide-eyed despite their professional demeanor. The massive doors to the council chamber parted, revealing a vast amphitheater filled with representatives from over 200 spacefaring civilizations. Species of every imaginable form occupied specialized seating arrangements. Some floated in liquid-filled pods. Others perched on crystalline structures or hovered above magnetized platforms. At the center, dais stood Chief Counselor Zathur, an imposing figure whose scaled skin shifted between deep purple and copper hues. The translator in Miller's ear rendered the alien's complex series of clicks and whistles into smooth English. "We welcome our newest probationary members," Zathur announced, scales rippling with what Miller had learned to interpret as pleased excitement. "The representatives of Earth, home to the species known as humans." Miller led the Earth delegation to their designated position, a simple platform that seemed almost primitive compared to the elaborate arrangements around them. He couldn't help but notice they were placed in the outer ring, alongside other probationary members. The preliminary formalities proceeded smoothly. Earth was officially recognized, and Miller delivered the carefully crafted speech of gratitude and peaceful intentions they had prepared. As he spoke, he noticed the subtle reactions among the council members, some leaning forward with interest, others making gestures his cultural briefings identified as skepticism or amusement. When the ceremonial portions concluded, Chief Counselor Zathur raised all 4 of his upper appendages. "Now we shall discuss the supervision protocols for Earth's integration into the galactic community." Miller exchanged a quick glance with Carter. This was expected. All new species underwent a probationary period. The terms had been broadly outlined during first contact, but the details would determine humanity's place in this new interstellar society. "As is customary," Zathur continued, "we have prepared a generous package of technological exchange, trade agreements, and cultural integration programs." The data streamed to Miller's pad, and as he scanned the initial points, his diplomatic smile remained fixed in place. But as he reached the section on oversight provisions, that smile began to strain. "These supervision requirements," he said carefully, "they seem quite extensive." Zathur's scales shifted to a deep blue. "Merely standard protocols for species at your development stage. You've only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, after all." President Carter leaned forward. "We understood there would be reasonable oversight, Counselor. But these provisions would give Council representatives authority over Earth's resource management, weapons development, and even our information networks." "For your protection, of course," replied Zathur smoothly. "Every species requires guidance during integration. The Council has vast experience in these matters." Miller scrolled further through the document, unease growing. The generous technology sharing came with strict limitations on how it could be adapted or improved. The trade agreements favored established council species, and the section on military restrictions would effectively neutralize Earth's defensive capabilities. "We'll need time to review these terms," Miller said diplomatically. Sthur's scales rippled. "Of course, Ambassador. But I should note that all probationary provisions are non-negotiable standard protocols. They have served hundreds of species, well over thousands of cycles." As they exited the chamber 2 hours later, Miller walked beside President Carter in silence until they reached the secure area designated for Earth's delegation. "They're not giving us a choice," Carter said once the privacy field activated. "This isn't partnership, it's vassalage." Miller removed his translator earpiece, ensuring it couldn't pick up their conversation. "The technological benefits are substantial, Madam President, and we are newcomers to their community." "A community that appears to have a very rigid hierarchy." Carter's eyes hardened. "Find out what happened to the last few species who joined. I want to know if everyone gets these standard protocols, or if we're being singled out." Miller nodded. "I'll put our team on it immediately." "And, John," she added, "find out what happens to species who refuse the Council's generous offer." Miller felt a chill, despite the perfectly regulated temperature. "You think it might come to that?" "I hope not," Carter replied. "But Earth didn't come this far to surrender its sovereignty, even to beings who can harness neutron stars." As the president turned away, Miller gazed back at the massive viewports. The blue spiral of the neutron star seemed less majestic now, more like a slowly tightening noose. The Council's initial requirements had seemed reasonable on the surface. Limitations on weapons development, environmental monitoring stations, cultural exchange programs, all presented as necessary safeguards for integrating a new species into the galactic community. 3 months into Earth's probationary status, Paul Jackson, Earth's Minister of Extraterrestrial Affairs, stared at the latest communiqué from the Council with growing frustration. "They're extending the oversight again," he told Susan Wright, the xenobiologist who had become one of his most trusted advisors. "Now they want quotas on asteroid mining in our own solar system." Susan pushed a strand of gray hair behind her ear, studying the document on her tablet. "That's the 3rd expansion of restrictions this month." Jackson's office in the newly constructed Extraterrestrial Affairs Complex in Geneva offered a panoramic view of Lake Geneva. But he barely noticed the scenery anymore. His days were consumed with responding to ever-increasing Council demands. "They're also requesting access to our global communications networks for cultural harmony monitoring," he continued, the frustration evident in his voice. "Whatever that means." "It means censorship," Susan replied bluntly. "I've been studying the Veltraxians' integration history. They mentioned similar provisions were imposed on them 2 centuries ago." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You've been talking to the Veltraxians?" "And the Hadarians," Susan confirmed. "I've been building a network among the other probationary species. There's a pattern here, Paul." Before she could elaborate, Jackson's secure line chimed. The holographic display showed Lisa Carter's concerned face. "Paul, we have a situation developing at Europa." Jackson straightened immediately. The research station on Jupiter's moon had been one of humanity's proudest achievements before first contact. Now it was their most advanced outpost in the solar system. "What's happening?" "The Council has deployed a military barrier around the moon," Carter explained, her voice tight. "They're claiming our research violates the technological development clauses of our agreement." "That's absurd," Susan interjected. "The Europa station predates first contact. It's explicitly exempted under Appendix C of the integration protocols." "Tell that to the Enforcement Division ships currently preventing our supply vessels from reaching the station," Carter replied grimly. "Dr. Alan Davis reports they have life support for 3 weeks at current capacity. After that..." She didn't need to finish the thought. Europa Station housed 17 scientists and engineers. conducting vital research on subsurface life forms discovered in the moon's vast subsurface ocean. Jackson felt a cold anger building. This is a deliberate escalation. They're testing how far they can push us. Agreed, said Carter. Ambassador Miller is requesting an emergency council session, but I need options. Paul, real ones. Jackson exchanged a look with Susan. Madam President, I think it's time we discussed Operation Breakwater. Carter's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. I was hoping we wouldn't need that particular contingency. So was I, Jackson admitted. But I've been speaking with some of our new colleagues. Earth isn't the first to face these expanding restrictions. The Veltraxians, the Hadarians, they've all been through similar integration processes. With what result? Complete economic and military subordination, Susan answered. They're effectively client states now, dependent on council approval for everything from energy production to population growth. Carter was silent for a moment, her mind visibly working through the implications. Keep Breakwater on standby. I'll give diplomacy one more chance, but prepare for my authorization if the council doesn't back down from Europa within 48 hours. As the call ended, Jackson turned to Susan. We need to accelerate our coordination with the other probationary species. Quietly. Susan nodded grimly. The Nor Collective has already expressed solidarity. They've faced similar restrictions on their quantum communication research. Good. Jackson stared out at the peaceful lake below. Because I think we're approaching the end of humanity's diplomatic honeymoon. The emergency council session was hastily convened, with considerably fewer representatives than the full assembly. Ambassador Miller stood at the central podium, facing the executive committee, the 7 most powerful species who effectively controlled council policy. The blockade of Europa Station constitutes a direct threat to human lives, Miller argued, keeping his voice measured despite his internal fury. The research conducted there falls well within the permitted activities under our agreement. Chief Counselor Zathur's scales had darkened to a deep indigo, a sign of displeasure. Miller had learned. Your species continues to misinterpret the clear boundaries established for your protection, Zathur replied. The biological experimentation on Europa exceeds acceptable parameters for a probationary species. They're studying indigenous microorganisms, Miller countered. Research that began before we even knew of the Council's existence. Nevertheless, interjected Councillor Vex of the Therigian Dominion, such research must now conform to Council oversight. The blockade will remain until your scientists submit to proper supervision. Miller felt his diplomatic restraint slipping. Those scientists have limited life support. This supervision you're imposing could kill them. Then I suggest you convince your government to comply quickly. Zathur responded, scales now pulsing between indigo and black. The Council's decisions are final. As Miller prepared his response, an aide rushed to his side, whispering urgently in his ear. His blood ran cold at the news. Chief Counselor, Miller said, his voice suddenly tight with controlled rage. I've just been informed that Enforcement Division vessels have fired upon Europa Station. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. Zathur's scales flashed briefly to yellow. Surprise? Before settling back to indigo. A regrettable misunderstanding, Zathur said smoothly. Merely warning shots to prevent an unauthorized launch from the station. If your people had complied with... Those warning shots have damaged the station's life support systems. Miller interrupted. Protocol forgotten in his anger. 17 human lives are now at immediate risk. Ambassador, Zathur's tone hardened. The Council regrets any casualties resulting from your government's continued defiance. However, rules must be enforced. Perhaps this unfortunate incident will encourage Earth to reconsider its resistant position. Miller stared at the alien diplomat, the mask of diplomacy finally falling away as he recognized the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an overzealous enforcement action. It was a calculated message. Submit or suffer the consequences. "This session is adjourned," announced Thur, rising from his position. "We will reconvene when Earth is prepared to discuss full compliance." As the council members filed out, Miller activated his secure communicator. President Carter's face appeared, grim and resolute. "They're not backing down," Miller reported. "In fact, they've escalated. They fired on the station, deliberate warning shots that just happened to hit critical systems." Carter's expression hardened. "Casualties? Unknown yet. Communications are intermittent after the attack." The president was silent for a long moment. "Return to Earth immediately, John. We're done with diplomacy." 16 hours later, the emergency session of the United Earth Coalition Security Council convened in the underground complex beneath Geneva. Representatives from all Earth nations sat in concentric circles around the central podium where Paul Jackson now stood. "The situation at Europa Station has deteriorated," he reported, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Life support systems are failing. Dr. Alan Davis and his team are working to restore minimal functionality, but they estimate no more than 72 hours before complete system failure." President Carter, seated at the primary position, leaned forward. "And the Council's response to our formal protest? They maintain it was an enforcement action justified under the integration protocols." Jackson replied bitterly. "They've offered to assist by sending their own engineers, provided we accept their full supervision terms for all solar system operations." Murmurs of anger rippled through the assembly. "Blackmail," stated the representative from the African Union. "An act of war," added his counterpart from the Asian Confederation. Carter raised a hand for silence. "Options for extraction of our people from Europa?" General Gary Williams, the recently appointed head of Earth's Unified Defense Forces, stood. "Any conventional approach would be intercepted by the Enforcement Division vessels. They outclass our ships in both speed and weaponry." "Then we need an unconventional approach," Carter said, her gaze sweeping the room. "Minister Jackson, I believe it's time you briefed the full council on Operation Breakwater." Jackson nodded, activating the central holographic display. A complex three-dimensional model of the solar system appeared, with highlighted points representing council vessels and Earth installations. "For the past 2 months, we've been developing contingency measures in case diplomacy failed," Jackson explained. "Operation Breakwater is a multi-phase plan to assert and defend Earth's sovereignty against Council overreach." The display zoomed in on Europa, showing the Council's blockade formation. "Phase 1 involves the deployment of our hybrid technology vessels," Jackson continued. "While publicly, we've maintained the appearance of complying with technological development restrictions. A select team has been integrating our own advances with the limited Council technology we've been permitted to access." General Williams took over, highlighting several points at the edge of the solar system. "We've positioned 5 prototype vessels here, and here, outside the Council's regular patrol routes. Each incorporates a modified version of the Council's own defensive systems, adapted using principles our scientists developed independently." "In simpler terms," Jackson clarified, "we've created ships that can penetrate their blockade by exploiting vulnerabilities in their own technology. Vulnerabilities they don't believe we're capable of understanding, let alone exploiting." Silence fell over the chamber as the implications sank in. "This goes well beyond the terms of our agreement with the Council," noted the European representative cautiously. "An agreement they've repeatedly violated," countered Carter. "The Council fired on unarmed scientists and threatened their lives as a negotiating tactic. I believe we've reached the end of the diplomatic road." She stood, commanding the attention of the entire assembly. "I am not proposing war. I am proposing we demonstrate to the Council that Earth will not be subjugated. Operation Breakwater will extract our people from Europa and establish a defensive perimeter around Earth's sphere of influence." "And if the Council responds with force?" asked the representative from Oceania. "Then we're prepared for that as well," General Williams answered grimly. "But Our intelligence suggests they rely heavily on intimidation, precisely because direct military action is costly and risky for them. Their enforcement division is designed to bully compliant species, not fight a determined resistance. President Carter surveyed the room, meeting the eyes of each representative. I need your decision. Do we submit to what amounts to galactic colonization, or do we stand our ground? One by one, the representatives signaled their positions. The vote was not unanimous. 3 nations abstained, but the overwhelming majority supported activation of Operation Breakwater. Then it's decided, Carter declared. General Williams, you have authorization to proceed with Phase 1 immediately. Our first priority is the rescue of our people on Europa. As the assembly dispersed, Susan Wright approached Jackson. There's something else you should know, she said quietly. I've been analyzing data from the other probationary species. The accident at Europa fits a pattern. Similar enforcement incidents have occurred on at least 7 other worlds during their integration periods. Jackson's expression darkened. Deliberately engineered crises to force compliance? It appears so, Susan confirmed. And in each case, the species involved eventually capitulated. Well, Jackson replied grimly, they haven't tried this approach with humans before. The Defiant, Earth's prototype hybrid vessel, dropped out of FTL on the dark side of Ganymede, Jupiter's largest moon. On the bridge, Captain Kate Summers studied the tactical display showing the 5 Council enforcement vessels maintaining their blockade around Europa. They haven't detected us yet, reported her tactical officer. The Council recognition protocols are accepting our modified signatures as authorized maintenance drones. Summers nodded approvingly. The ship's design was the product of Earth's finest minds working in secret, combining humanity's own technological innovations with adapted Council systems. From the outside, it appeared to be a standard Council utility vessel, at least to the automated identification systems. Status of Europa Station? She asked. Life support critical and failing, came the grim reply. Estimated 12 hours remaining at current levels. We're picking up emergency transmissions from Dr. Davis, requesting immediate evacuation. And the Council's response? They're maintaining position and repeating demands for Earth to accept full supervision protocols before they'll allow any ships to approach. Summers' jaw tightened. Commence Phase 1. Deploy the countermeasure buoys as planned. Outside the ship, small, unassuming devices detached and moved silently toward predetermined coordinates. Based on a breakthrough in understanding the Council's sensor technology, these buoys would create a temporary blind spot in the blockade, not by jamming the sensors, which would trigger alarms, but by feeding them false data that their own systems would accept as legitimate. Buoys in position, reported her navigator. Corridor established. Proceed to Phase 2, ordered Summers. Initiate Europa approach. Keep us in the shadow corridor and maintain Council vessel profile. The Defiant moved smoothly toward the ice-covered moon, threading through the invisible corridor created by the countermeasure buoys. On the tactical display, the Council vessels remained in position, their systems registering nothing unusual. We're receiving a transmission from Dr. Davis, announced the communications officer. Audio only. Their communications array is severely damaged. Put it through, Summers commanded. The strained voice of Alan Davis filled the bridge. Unknown vessel. This is Europa Station. Our situation is critical. Main life support has failed, and we're operating on emergency systems only. 3 casualties from the initial impact, and the rest of us are running out of options. Summers leaned forward. Dr. Davis, this is Captain Kate Summers of the UEC vessel Defiant. We're approaching your position for immediate evacuation. Prepare your team for emergency departure. There was a moment of stunned silence before Davis responded, his voice thick with emotion. Captain, you should know. The Council ships have threatened to fire on any vessel approaching the station. Let us worry about that, Doctor, Summers replied confidently. Just get your people ready to move. We'll be docking in approximately 20 minutes. As the Defiant closed the final distance to Europa, one of the Council vessels adjusted its position slightly. "They're running an active scan," reported the tactical officer tensely. "I think they're getting suspicious of our profile." "Maintain course," Summers ordered calmly. "The countermeasures should hold for another 17 minutes, more than enough time to complete extraction." The officer nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Captain, they're powering up weapon systems." Summers made a quick decision. Initiate Phase 3. Deploy countermeasure packages Alpha through Delta. From the Defiant, 4 specialized drones launched silently, each heading toward one of the Council vessels. These were perhaps the most audacious element of Operation Breakwater, devices designed to temporarily disable the Council ship's weapons and propulsion systems using the Council's own security protocols against them. "Packages away," confirmed the tactical officer. "Approaching Council vessels now." On the display, the drones disappeared from view as they attached themselves to the hulls of the Council ships, becoming virtually invisible to sensors. "Countermeasure packages in position," reported the officer. "Awaiting your command to activate." Summers hesitated. This was the point of no return. A direct action against Council military vessels that could be interpreted as an act of war. "The lead Council vessel is locking weapons on Europa Station," warned her tactical officer. "They've detected our approach." "Activate all countermeasure packages," Summers ordered without further hesitation. Full spectrum deployment. Throughout the Jupiter system, the carefully orchestrated plan unfolded. The countermeasure drones activated simultaneously, exploiting a vulnerability in the Council ship's operating systems that Earth's cyber specialists had discovered. Rather than attacking the ships directly, the drones simply triggered the vessel's own security protocols, causing them to interpret their weapon systems as compromised and automatically shut them down. On the tactical display, Summers watched as, one by one, the Council vessels went dark, their systems initiating emergency resets that would take hours to complete. "Council vessels neutralized," reported her tactical officer, unable to keep the note of triumph from his voice. "No weapons fired, no casualties. They're effectively paralyzed." "Excellent," Summers replied, allowing herself a brief smile. "Proceed to Europa Station and commence evacuation procedures, and send word to Earth. Phase 1 of Operation Breakwater has succeeded." Within the hour, the surviving scientists and staff of Europa Station were safely aboard the Defiant, receiving medical attention for injuries sustained during the Council's warning shots. As Summers gave the order to depart Jupiter space, she knew they had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back. Earth had just demonstrated it would not be bullied into submission, and the Galactic Council was about to learn that humans were unlike any species they had tried to subjugate before. The news of the successful Europa extraction spread rapidly through Earth's communications networks. For the first time since first contact, a sense of defiant pride replaced the cautious deference that had characterized humanity's approach to the Council. In Geneva, President Carter addressed a global audience, her expression resolute. "Today, the United Earth Coalition demonstrated that humanity will not surrender its sovereignty or abandon its people," she declared. The Council's unprovoked attack on Europa Station and subsequent threats crossed a line that no self-respecting civilization can ignore. She paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "I want to be clear. Earth desires peaceful relations with all spacefaring species. We join the Galactic Council in good faith, seeking cooperation and mutual advancement. But we will not accept subjugation disguised as protection, or colonization masked as integration." The response from the Council came swiftly. Chief Counselor Zathur appeared on a special broadcast, his scales fluctuating between deep red and black, colors Miller had never seen him display before. "The rogue actions of Earth constitute a grave violation of Council protocols," Zathur announced, his translated voice carrying tones of outrage. Their military vessels employed unauthorized technology to disable Enforcement Division ships on legitimate peacekeeping duty. Such actions cannot go unanswered. The Council formally suspended Earth's probationary status and declared a full blockade of the Sol system. All trade and communication with other Council species was prohibited, and Earth representatives were banned from Council space. But even as the Council attempted to isolate Earth, something unexpected began to happen. Representatives from other probationary species reached out through unofficial channels, expressing support for Earth's stance. The Veltraxians, whose elegant crystalline ships had long been restricted to limited trade routes, sent a coded message to Minister Jackson. Your defiance gives hope to all who chafe under the Council's protection. The Veltraxian Consortium stands ready to coordinate responses. Similar messages arrived from the Hadarians, the Nor Collective, and a dozen other species who had experienced the Council's increasingly restrictive oversight. In a secure meeting room deep beneath Geneva, Paul Jackson briefed President Carter and her inner circle on these developments. We're not alone in our frustrations, he explained, displaying a galactic map highlighting the 23 species who had reached out. The Council's approach to integration has created a substantial block of discontented members. Susan Wright added, most of these species have been under probationary status for decades, some for centuries. The Council keeps moving the goalposts for full membership, while gradually increasing restrictions. President Carter studied the map thoughtfully. Can we trust these overtures? The Council could be setting a trap to justify stronger action against us. Possible, Jackson acknowledged, but unlikely. Susan has been cultivating these relationships for months. The pattern of grievances is too consistent, the communications too detailed to be fabrication. General Williams spoke up. What's more, our intelligence suggests the Council is genuinely rattled by our Europa operation. They didn't believe we could bypass their security systems, certainly not so effectively and without casualties. They've underestimated human ingenuity, Carter observed. A common mistake throughout our own history, when more technologically advanced societies encountered those they considered primitive. Exactly, agreed Susan. And now other species are seeing possibilities they hadn't considered. The Veltraxians are particularly interested in our hybrid technology approach. Carter was silent for a moment, weighing the implications. What are you proposing, Minister Jackson? Operation Defiance, he replied. The second phase of our contingency planning. Instead of fighting the Council's isolation, we embrace it and extend a hand to the other probationary species to form our own coalition. He activated a holographic display showing a complex network of potential diplomatic, economic, and defensive arrangements between Earth and the other discontented species. The Council's power relies on keeping younger species isolated and dependent, Jackson continued. If we can establish direct relationships with these other civilizations, bypassing Council restrictions, we create an alternative power structure they can't easily control. You're talking about a galactic insurgency, Carter said, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. I'm talking about legitimate self-determination, Jackson countered. Every species represented here joined the Council voluntarily, seeking partnership. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a system of perpetual subordination. Susan added, the Nor Collective has already suggested hosting a clandestine gathering at Epsilon 9, a neutral trading post beyond the Council's direct control. Representatives from all interested species could meet to discuss a unified response. Carter considered this for a long moment. The risks are substantial. If the Council discovers such a meeting, they could respond with military force, not just against Earth, but against all participants. True, General Williams acknowledged. But our success at Europa has demonstrated a critical weakness in their approach. The Council relies on intimidation and the perception of overwhelming technological superiority. Once that illusion is broken, their actual capacity to project military power becomes more limited. And there's another factor, added Susan. Many full council members are growing uncomfortable with the Enforcement Division's expanding authority. The Tyranny Federation has privately expressed concerns about the handling of Europa. Carter stood, walking slowly around the holographic display as she considered their options. Finally, she turned to face her advisors. Proceed with arrangements for the Epsilon 9 meeting, she decided. But make it clear to all participants that our goal is reform, not rebellion. We want a seat at the table, a real one, not the illusion the Council has offered us. As the meeting concluded, Jackson remained behind with Carter. There's something else you should know, Madam President, he said once they were alone. Susan has uncovered evidence suggesting the incident at Europa wasn't an isolated event. Similar accidents have occurred on multiple probationary worlds, always resulting in the species accepting increased restrictions. Carter's expression hardened. You're suggesting this is a deliberate strategy, creating crises to force compliance. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence, Jackson confirmed grimly. And there's more. The Hadarians lost an entire research outpost in what the Council classified as an unfortunate navigational error by an enforcement vessel. 72 scientists killed, after which the Hadarians accepted full supervision protocols. My God, Carter whispered. They're not just bureaucratic bullies, they're systematic oppressors. Which makes our stand at Europa all the more significant. Jackson noted. We may have been the first to successfully resist their tactics. Carter's jaw set with determination. Gather all the evidence. If what you're suggesting is true, we need to present it at Epsilon 9. The Council has presented itself as a benevolent governing body. If we can prove otherwise, even full members might reconsider their positions. That's exactly what I was thinking, Jackson agreed. Susan is already working with her contacts to compile documentation of similar incidents across multiple worlds. Good. Carter's eyes held a steely resolve. Because this isn't just about Earth's sovereignty anymore. It's about exposing a system that's failed the very principles it claims to uphold. The trading post at Epsilon 9 had begun as a simple refueling station at the junction of several well-traveled space lanes. Over time, it had grown into a bustling hub of commerce existing in the gray area of Council jurisdiction, technically under their authority, but practically operating with significant autonomy due to its distance from major Council worlds. It was here, in a retrofitted storage facility designated Hangar 17, that representatives from 23 probationary species gathered in secret. Security was tight, with each delegation bringing their own protective measures to supplement the elaborate system of countermeasures established by Earth and Veltraxian specialists. John Miller, no longer wearing his formal diplomatic uniform, but dressed in the practical attire of a commercial trader, surveyed the gathering with a sense of cautious optimism. The room buzzed with multiple translation systems, working simultaneously as delegates from wildly different evolutionary backgrounds attempted to communicate. Quite a collection, remarked Susan Wright, who had joined him for this historic meeting. Some of these species have been at odds with each other historically, yet here they are, united by common grievance. Miller nodded. The question is whether shared frustration can translate into constructive action. That's where you come in, Ambassador, she replied with a slight smile. You may have been recalled from the Council, but your diplomatic skills are needed more than ever. Before Miller could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the proceedings. President Carter, who had taken the extraordinary risk of attending in person, moved to the central platform. Beside her stood Kalor of the Veltraxians, whose crystalline form refracted the light in mesmerizing patterns, and Dax Nor, the fluid form representative of the Nor Collective. Fellow sovereign species, Carter began, her voice carried by translators to every delegation. We gather here not to plot rebellion, but to assert our rightful place in the galactic community. Each of us joined the council seeking partnership and progress. Instead, we found increasing restrictions and diminishing returns. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Earth's recent experience at Europa Station, Carter continued, but was interrupted by a commotion at the hangar's entrance. Miller turned to see a contingent of Hadarians entering. Large, amphibious beings whose elaborate breathing apparatus created a distinctive sound as they moved. What was surprising was not their presence. They had been expected. But the individual accompanying them, a tall, slender figure with the unmistakable copper-hued scales of a council member. "Is that—" Susan began. "Councillor Vexel," Miller confirmed, recognizing the junior member of the council executive committee. This just got a lot more complicated. The assembly fell silent as the Hadarians and their unexpected companion approached the central platform. Carter maintained her composure, though Miller could see the tension in her posture. "President Carter," Vexil greeted her, his scales shifting through subtle patterns of blue and green. "This gathering violates at least 17 council directives. And yet here you are, Counselor," Carter replied evenly. "Not with an enforcement division fleet, but in person. I find that interesting." Vexil's scales rippled in what Miller recognized as the equivalent of a wry smile. "Official channels are compromised at present. What you have begun has created significant disruption within the council hierarchy." "That was not our primary intention," Carter said diplomatically. "Though I can't say we're entirely displeased by the effect." "May I address this assembly?" Vexil requested, gesturing to the gathered representatives. Carter exchanged quick glances with Kalor and Dax Nor, who indicated their assent with their species' respective gestures. "The floor is yours, Counselor," Carter agreed, stepping aside. Vexil moved to the center of the platform, his tall form commanding attention without effort. "I speak not as a representative of the council, but as a member of the Therigian conclave who has served within the council for 7 centuries, he began. "What I say here would be considered treason by Chief Counselors Thur and his allies, but it must be said nonetheless." The assembly stirred with surprise and interest. The council was founded 12,000 years ago with noble purpose: to prevent the devastating interstellar wars that had nearly destroyed all advanced life in this sector of the galaxy. Vexil continued. For millennia, it served that purpose well, guiding younger species toward peaceful integration and technological responsibility. His scales darkened slightly. But over the past 7 centuries, a shift has occurred. The Enforcement Division, originally created to maintain peace between member worlds, has grown into an instrument of control. The probationary system, designed to ease transition into the galactic community, has become a permanent state for many species. Miller felt a surge of vindication. Here was confirmation of everything they had suspected, coming from within the Council itself. What humanity achieved at Europa was unprecedented, Vexil acknowledged. Not because of the technology, though your adaptations were impressive, but because you succeeded where others capitulated. You demonstrated that the Council's power relies primarily on the compliance of those it governs. "Why are you telling us this?" asked Kalor of the Veltraxians, crystalline form shimmering with skepticism. "Why betray your own council?" "Because I serve the ideal of the council, not its current corruption," Vexil replied firmly. "I am not alone in this view. Many full members have watched with growing concern as Thur and his faction have centralized power and expanded restrictions on probationary worlds." Susan Wright stepped forward. "Counselor, we've compiled evidence of what appears to be a systematic pattern of engineered crises on probationary worlds, incidents that conveniently resulted in species accepting greater restrictions." She activated a holographic display showing a timeline of accidents across multiple worlds over the past century, with striking similarities in their timing and outcomes. Vexil studied the display, his scales shifting to a deep purple that Miller had never seen before. This confirms suspicions many of us have harbored, but could not prove. The Enforcement Division operates with increasing autonomy, even from Council oversight. Then help us, Carter urged. This gathering represents 23 species who joined the Council in good faith. We don't seek to destroy the Council. We seek to reform it, to return it to the noble purpose you described. Vexil was silent for a long moment, his scales cycling through a complex pattern that the translators couldn't interpret. Finally, he spoke. What you propose is revolutionary, President Carter. The established members who benefit from the current system will resist fiercely. And those who share your concerns, pressed Miller. How many would stand with reform if given the opportunity? More than Zithur realizes, Vexil admitted. The Tyranny, the Belsheri Consensus, the Elam Confederacy, all have expressed private reservations about recent enforcement actions. Carter exchanged glances with her fellow representatives. Then, perhaps this gathering should expand its purpose, not simply to protest our treatment as probationary members, but to propose a fundamental restructuring of the Council itself. For the next 12 hours, the unprecedented alliance drafted what would come to be known as the Epsilon Accords, a comprehensive proposal for Council reform that would eliminate permanent probationary status, restrict the powers of the Enforcement Division, and establish equal representation for all member species, regardless of technological development. Vexil provided crucial insights into Council procedures and potential allies among full members. By the time the document was complete, 17 of the most influential full Council species had been secretly contacted through secure channels established by the Nor Collective. As the gathering prepared to disperse, Carter addressed them one final time. What we have done here today may be remembered as either the beginning of a new era of true galactic cooperation, or as a failed rebellion against an entrenched power. She acknowledged, the risks are substantial for all of us, but I believe the principles we've articulated are worth those risks. Vexil, who had committed himself irrevocably to their cause, added, I will return to Council space to continue our diplomatic efforts, but be prepared. Zithur will not surrender power easily. The Enforcement Division remains at his disposal, and he will not hesitate to use it. Miller approached Carter as the delegates began to depart. Madam President, I'd like to volunteer to accompany Councillor Vexil. My experience with Council protocols could be valuable in the diplomatic phase. Carter studied him thoughtfully. It would be extremely dangerous, John. If Zithur discovers Vexil's role in this, anyone associated with him would share his fate. Nevertheless, Miller insisted, this is too important to leave to chance. We need someone who understands both human and Council perspectives to help navigate what comes next. After a moment, Carter nodded. Very well, Ambassador. But remember, your primary mission is to ensure these reforms reach the full Council for consideration. The future of Earth's relationship with the galactic community depends on it. As Miller prepared to depart with Vexil, Susan Wright approached him with a data crystal. Everything we've compiled on the Enforcement Division's activities, she explained. If things go badly with Zithur, this might be your only leverage. Miller accepted the crystal solemnly. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But even as the delegates of the Epsilon gathering returned to their respective worlds, events were already in motion that would bring matters to a head far sooner than any of them anticipated. Chief Counselor Zithur stood in the private observatory of his personal quarters, watching the spiral of the neutron star that powered the Council headquarters. The blue glow cast harsh shadows across his scaled face as he listened to the report from the head of the Enforcement Division. The gathering at Epsilon 9 included representatives from 23 probationary species, Commander Drax stated, his mechanical enhancements gleaming in the dim light. They departed 18 hours ago. Destination unknown. And Councillor Vexil? Zithur inquired, his scales darkening to near black. Still unaccounted for since his unauthorized departure 3 days ago. Sthur made a gesture that his species used to indicate contemplative disgust. Humans. Always they are at the center of this disruption. In 3 cycles, they have undermined structures that have maintained order for millennia. Your instructions, Chief Counselor? Drax prompted. Deploy the fleet, Sthur decided. All available enforcement vessels. I want Earth isolated completely. No communications. No movement in or out of their system. And the other probationary worlds involved in this conspiracy. Monitor them closely, but focus our strength on Earth. Cut off the head, and the body will wither. Sthur turned from the viewport, his scales now pulsing with determined purpose. This insurrection ends now, Commander, by whatever means necessary. As the enforcement fleet mobilized, moving with unprecedented speed toward the Sol system, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the future of the Galactic Council and humanity's place within it, or beyond it. John Miller and Counselor Vexel arrived at the Council hub aboard a Belsheri diplomatic vessel, one of the few species Vexel had fully trusted with knowledge of their mission. As they approached the Central Council complex, Miller couldn't help but compare this arrival with his first, just months earlier. Then, he had been filled with optimism about humanity's new place in the galactic community. Now, he carried the weight of a potential revolution. Something's wrong, Vexel noted as they docked, his scales shifting to an alert yellow. Security protocols have been elevated to crisis levels. Miller checked the data feed on his translator pad. Reports coming in. The Enforcement Division has deployed its entire fleet. They're heading for Earth. Vexel's scales paled. Sthur is moving faster than I anticipated. We must reach the Council chamber immediately. They hurried through the gravity-shifting corridors, Vexel's authority granting them access despite the heightened security. As they approached the Council chamber, they could hear the amplified voice of Chief Counselor Sthur addressing what sounded like a full emergency session. Dar. This coordinated defiance represents the greatest threat to Council stability in 7,000 cycles. Sthur was declaring as they entered. The human-led conspiracy seeks to undermine the very foundations of our galactic order. The chamber was indeed filled to capacity, with representatives from all full member species present either physically or via holographic projection. Miller noted with concern that representatives from probationary species were conspicuously absent. Sthur paused mid-sentence as he noticed Vexel and Miller's entrance. His scales darkened dramatically. Counselor Vexel, he acknowledged coldly. Your timing is fortuitous. Perhaps you can explain your unauthorized absence during this crisis, and why you return in the company of a human whose species has been suspended from Council membership. Vexel moved forward confidently, his tall form commanding attention. I return, Chief Counselor, because the Council faces a crisis of its own making, one that threatens not human society, but our own legitimacy. Murmurs spread through the assembled representatives. I have been investigating disturbing patterns in Enforcement Division activities, Vexel continued, his voice projecting throughout the chamber. Patterns that suggest systematic manipulation of probationary species through manufactured crises. These are serious accusations. Counselor, interjected the representative of the Tyranni Federation. Do you have evidence for such claims? I do, Vexel confirmed, nodding to Miller, who activated the data crystal Susan Wright had provided. The holographic display in the center of the chamber filled with a detailed timeline, incidents across dozens of worlds over centuries, each followed by increased restrictions on the affected species. The correlation was undeniable, even to those seeing it for the first time. This is manipulation of Council data, Sthur declared, his scales pulsing with rage. A human fabrication designed to divide us. The data comes from your own secure archives, Chief Counselor, Vexel countered. Accessible only to Executive Committee members, which is why it has remained hidden for so long. The chamber erupted in overlapping discussions as representatives reacted to the evidence. Miller watched carefully, noting which species seemed genuinely shocked and which seemed unsurprised, potentially already aware of these practices. Zthur raised all 4 upper limbs, demanding silence. Even if these incidents occurred, they represent necessary actions to maintain galactic stability. The probationary system protects developing species from their own excesses, while safeguarding established civilizations from unpredictable technologies. Is that what happened at Europa? Miller spoke for the first time, stepping forward beside Vexel. Were you protecting Earth scientists from their own excesses when your vessels fired on an unarmed research station? When you threatened 17 lives as leverage for greater control? You have no standing here. Human, Zthur hissed, scales now almost black with fury. Perhaps not officially, Miller conceded. But I represent one of 23 species who have signed the Epsilon Accords, a proposal for Council reform that would end these manipulative practices while preserving the Council's core mission of peaceful cooperation. He activated another holographic display, showing the full text of the Accords alongside the signatures of all participating species. This document has also been transmitted to every Council member world, Miller added. As we speak, your own populations are learning of the systematic oppression conducted in their name. This revelation clearly caught Zthur off guard. His scales fluctuated rapidly between colors before settling into a dangerous deep red. Commander Drax, he called, and a side door opened to admit the cybernetically enhanced head of the Enforcement Division. This session is being disrupted by unauthorized participants, spreading dangerous misinformation. Remove them. Drax moved forward with mechanical precision. But before he could reach Miller and Vexel, the chamber doors opened again. A contingent of representatives entered, not council members, but leaders from the probationary species who had gathered at Epsilon 9. At their head walked President Lisa Carter, flanked by Kalor of the Veltraxians and Dax Nor of the Nor Collective. Chief Counselor, Carter greeted Zthur with calm authority. I believe this discussion concerns us directly. As signatories to the Epsilon Accords, we claim the right to present our case to the full council. This is unprecedented, sputtered the representative from the Jaxari Imperium, a traditionally conservative council member. Probationary species have no standing in emergency sessions. Perhaps that is precisely the problem we must address, suggested the Tyranni representative, rising from her position. I move that we hear their proposal before taking any irreversible action. To Miller's surprise, several other full council members indicated their support for this motion. Zthur found himself suddenly facing not just external pressure, but internal division. Very well, he conceded, with visible reluctance. Present your accords, but know that the enforcement fleet continues its deployment. This changes nothing. Carter stepped to the center of the chamber, her presence somehow filling the vast space despite her comparatively small human stature. The Epsilon Accords propose a fundamental restructuring of the Galactic Council, she began. Not to destroy what has been built over millennia, but to fulfill its original promise, a true community of equals working toward shared prosperity and peace. For the next hour, she outlined the key provisions. Elimination of permanent probationary status in favor of a staged integration process with clear, objective milestones. Restructuring of the Enforcement Division into a truly neutral peacekeeping force with oversight from all member species, and equal representation for all members, regardless of technological development or length of membership. As she spoke, Miller watched the reactions among the council representatives. Many seemed genuinely intrigued by the proposals, while others, particularly those from the oldest member species, appeared resistant. Zthur himself remained ominously still, his scales fixed in that deep red hue that suggested barely contained fury. When Carter concluded, the Tyranni representative was the first to speak. These proposals merit serious consideration, The evidence presented regarding Enforcement Division activities is disturbing, to say the least. I concur, added the representative of the Elam Confederacy, a species known for its commitment to ethical governance. If even half of these incidents were deliberately engineered, it represents a profound betrayal of Council principles. But the Jaxari representative countered. This entire situation has been manufactured by humans to destabilize the Council. Their actions at Europa were a direct military challenge to legitimate Council authority. After the Council fired on unarmed scientists, Kalor of the Veltraxians pointed out, crystalline form pulsing with emotion. A pattern repeated across multiple worlds, as the evidence clearly shows. The debate intensified, with Council members increasingly divided between those supporting reform and those defending the status quo. Throughout it all, Zthur remained silent, though Miller noticed him exchanging private communications with Commander Drax. Finally, the Chief Counselor raised his limbs for attention. "This discussion has been informative," he stated, his tone deceptively calm. "It is clear that these matters require careful deliberation. I propose a recess of 3 cycles to allow all representatives to consult with their governments." Miller tensed, recognizing the tactic for what it was, a delay to allow the enforcement fleet to reach Earth. Before anyone could respond to Zthur's suggestion, an urgent communication broke through the chamber's security protocols, projecting automatically onto the central display. It showed a tactical feed from the edge of the Sol system, where the approaching enforcement fleet had suddenly encountered a massive defensive array. "What is this?" demanded Zthur, scales flickering with surprise. The display showed dozens, no, hundreds, of vessels and defensive platforms arranged in a complex, interlocking formation around Earth's solar system. Some were recognizably of human design, but others clearly belonged to Veltraxian, Hadarian, and other probationary species. "Phase 2 of Operation Defiance," Carter explained calmly. "While we sincerely hoped for a diplomatic resolution, we prepared for the alternative. The combined defensive forces of 23 species now stand together to protect not just Earth, but all signatories to the Epsilon Accords." The chamber erupted in chaos as the implications became clear. What had begun as Earth's isolated stand was now a coordinated alliance of multiple spacefaring civilizations. "This is rebellion," Zthur declared, abandoning all pretense of calm. "Commander Drax, order the fleet to engage." "I would reconsider that order, Chief Counselor," cautioned Vexil, stepping forward. "Look more closely at the defensive array." The tactical display zoomed in on several key nodes in the defensive formation, revealing specialized countermeasure systems based on the same principles that had neutralized the Council vessels at Europa, but on a vastly larger scale. "Your fleet would be immobilized before firing a single shot," Vexil explained. "And, unlike at Europa, where humans took extraordinary care to avoid casualties, I cannot guarantee all these species would show the same restraint." Zthur's scales pulsed with rage and something else. Fear. For perhaps the first time in his long tenure as Chief Counselor, he faced a situation he could not control through intimidation or force. "The Tyranni Federation withdraws its support for military action," announced the Tyranni representative suddenly. "We call for an immediate vote on the Epsilon Accords." "As do the Belsheri," added their representative. One by one, Council members began to shift their positions, sensing the changing tide of galactic politics. Not all supported the reforms. The Jaxari and several others maintained their opposition, but enough moved to create a clear majority. Zthur, seeing his authority crumbling, made one last desperate attempt. "Commander Drax, secure the chamber. These proceedings are suspended under emergency protocols." But even as Drax moved to comply, other security forces, those loyal to Council members who had sided with the reformers, blocked his path. "I believe, Chief Counselor," Miller said quietly, "that the time for unilateral decisions has passed." For 3 tense days, The Council remained in nearly continuous session, debating and revising the Epsilon Accords. Throughout it all, the defensive alliance maintained its position, neither advancing nor retreating, simply holding firm in its unified stance. On the fourth day, with Zthur effectively sidelined by a vote of no confidence, the reformed Galactic Charter was ratified. The 23 former probationary species were granted full membership status. The Enforcement Division was disbanded and reconstituted as the Common Defense Alliance with transparent oversight, and a new era of galactic governance began. As John Miller stood on the observation deck of the Council headquarters, watching the blue spiral of the neutron star that had once seemed so intimidating, he felt a presence beside him. "Quite a view," remarked President Carter, who had just been confirmed as Earth's permanent representative to the new Council. "Does it look different to you now?" Miller considered the question. "Not the star itself," he replied, "but what it represents. When I first saw it, it seemed like a symbol of power beyond our comprehension, something we could only submit to. Now it's just a natural phenomenon, impressive, but not intimidating." "A bit like the Council itself," Carter observed with a slight smile. "Exactly." Miller turned to face her. "What happens next?" "The hard part," she admitted. "Building something that actually works better than what came before. Proving that our stand was about principles, not just human exceptionalism." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "The Veltraxians are already proposing a joint research initiative on their crystalline propulsion technology. The Hadarians want to revisit those Europa studies that started all this. And 17 former full members are still skeptical of the whole arrangement," Carter added. "We've got our work cut out for us." "But at least it's our work," Miller pointed out, "not tasks assigned by a distant authority deciding what we're ready for." As they turned to leave, Miller took one last look at the neutron star. Its blue spiral continued its eternal dance, indifferent to the political revolution that had just transpired in its orbit. In the vastness of the galaxy, even the most dramatic shifts in power were small things, but to the billions of sentient beings affected by those shifts, they made all the difference. Humanity had refused to compromise its essential freedoms, and in doing so, had become not just another species in the galactic community, but architects of its reformation. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since first contact, it was truly their own to chart. And somewhere in the depths of space, aboard a vessel bound for parts unknown, former Chief Counselor Zthur watched the news of the Council's transformation with darkened scales. This was not the end, he vowed silently. Merely a setback in a game played across millennia. Humans had proven more troublesome than anticipated, but the galaxy was vast, and time was long. He would wait, and watch, and remember,